about the ethical situation, particularly when he filled out the application for employment. He didn't want to lie. This was post-Food Line and post-Mirage Bar. And I believe the story he tells is that he said, "Where did you go to school?" And he wrote down Amherst College, high school education, and yet they hired him anyway. He feels because they thought maybe Amherst College was a junior college. But as Jackie mentioned, with Google searches, and whenever he applied in 2000, 1998, whenever it was, nobody did a Google search. But now they might. And they would certainly discover his background and all of that. So it seems to me that in order for this technique to be successful in the future, a great deal of lying will have to take place in order to get into it. Now, as that happens, if it happens, does that compromise the form? Does it compromise the undercover technique?
I think it comes down to what you're trying to do.
Can you use a microphone?
Oh, sure. It's funny. I talked about how all of them, well, certainly Shane and Ted Conover, they talked about the need to develop their own ethics code. And in the discussion that they had with one another at NYU, they talked about that. They talked about, Shane Bauer at one point said, he wasn't going to lie. He was going to, he wasn't going to lie. That was his thing.
But did he tell them who his previous employers were?
Yeah, he was honest on the application. I just think when they were so desperate to hire people, they were making $9 an hour, and I just don't think they did a very thorough background check with him. So, but I think you're right. In the future, I think that journalists who want to do this work, they have to really think about their whole social media profile and what they'll do and not do. And if someone lies about who they are, I think that may compromise. These guys were honest in their applications. They went in there and then they had their own view about how they were going to handle things that might, expose them. But no, I think you're right. Raise a valid point.
If I might just, Shane Bauer did not falsify anything, but it wasn't just that it wasn't that he's just not lying out of an ethics position, but it was the mother of his lawyers who said you need to state exactly everything totally truthfully on that application. So he had Mother Jones on the application. All they had to do was Google, and they would probably see that he was not the guy to hire, but they didn't. But I think you're right. With the more success that he has, and I posed that question to him, will you see a diminishing returns your ability to do this? And he said, maybe, but journalists don't have that high of a profile. He said, like the Daily Show, they had, diminishing returns where they could do those interviews and interview somebody who didn't know what was, that John Oliver's in front of them, what to expect. There's a different profile though for journalists. But yeah, absolutely, the more successful you are. That's why Honest and Antonio Salas remain anonymous. So they can continue to do that.
Todd?
I'm wondering whether the undercover tool has been subverted a little bit by reality television, and that some viewers think that that's what they're getting. So.
I think that the level of trust is pretty low. The level of trust of journalists is pretty low, and I think part of that is because we're seeing all this undercover, like undercover boss. Like the boss goes undercover to expose how his employees are really working, but that's entertainment. It's billed as true, but that they're cutting things and editing things, and it's not quite true. Whereas journalists, who are doing this. It depends on what medium they're primarily working in. I mean, even though Shane Bauer's piece appeared as a video series and podcast series and all of that, I get the sense that it was first a written, and he had the writing in mind is first. But I think the more you know, the different mediums, probably, you know, video, that probably does undermine, because of all the entertainment that's out there that's purporting to be, you know, real.
Also, I absolutely think you're correct. NBC's To Catch a Predator is absolutely guilty of exactly that, where basically they're in collusion with law enforcement, and they set up these entrapment cases basically to catch child pornographers. But even more than that, I worry that it's been sort of hijacked by partisan hackery. O'Keefe, I believe, the sort of the right-wing hatchet man. Yes.
James O'Keefe.
Right, that's right. You know, went undercover to film Planned Parenthood and their discussions about whether or not they sell, you know, baby parts on the market, right? And highly edited, highly, you know, it was absolutely a hatchet job, right? There was nothing truthful about it, nothing journalistic either, let alone literary. But yes, it's been hijacked, certainly, for that kind of endeavor.
For Todd, it seems some of this comes under the heading of the public's desire to know the truth, rather than the public's right to know the truth. That there's less of a desire to check institutions or to check to just know that there's some civic responsibility. So I'd be interested in your comment on that, and also related to, like, prior to Food Lion was the Westmoreland lawsuit was 84-85 against CBS, and that was at a time when a lot of corporations were going after or were being sued for libel. So there was that groundswell of attacks against institutions that started to put a price tag on that kind of journalism, that sort of courageous journalism. At the same time that the deregulation allowed the corporate parent to get so much larger. So it seems that there's a lot of context, starting with the public's desire to know. Maybe they don't want to know.
I think you're probably right about that last one. Yeah, I mean, what you just said, I mean, that's exactly the institutional situation that journalism has been given. But back to the first point, yeah, I mean, one of my favorite Orwell lines is that, you know, it's, sometimes we think that people want to know the truth. Oftentimes, they don't.
Right, so it almost seems that we need to focus as much on teaching the citizen how to appreciate and understand and use journalism as opposed to just teaching how to do journalism, right?
Right, well, that gets back to the trust issue. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Hello, this is for Liliana. I was recently at a defense PhD thesis in Malaga of one of our members, and he made a study of literary journalism, which he calls narrative journalism in Spain, from 2006 to 2016, and he says that in Spain, literary journalism is living mostly in book form. There is hardly any literary journalism being printed in the media, and I was wondering what is the situation like in Latin America?
Yes, thank you. This is very interesting because actually I found out also in my own research that the book is being now, well, it's a very traditional, old-fashioned way of writing the book, but actually is the best format now for journalists in Latin America that are writing under certain risk, particularly with, for instance, in Mexico with the war against drugs. There has been a boom of books on that because of censorship in the newspapers or magazines that are not considering publishing as they used to publish on this topic. So now journalists are publishing more books and they are just, well, doing conventional journalism for their newspapers or for television, but they're saving the stories for books. Yeah, it's interesting.
If I can just say that the same situation is in Australia and has been since the 80s, really, when we lost a lot of our long-form periodicals. And now literary journalists write books, and they've done it for probably the last 3 decades, I'd say. That's the only way their day job is the journalism. They don't get resourced to go and write a book. They have to do it in their spare time and on the weekend. But it's been like that, I think, because we're such a big country with small publication opportunities, they just can't resource it.
Sue, I wanted to ask you a question. Sue has given me the challenge of trying to find a common link here, and I was thinking about voice and
She's undercover.
and the question about the attacks on Anna Goldsworthy. I mean, I'm just wondering, sort of in all of that, because it seems so vitriolic,
Okay.
so personal. Sort of what you felt was really kind of parsing, kind of teasing through all of this stuff.
One of the things in the cut for the paper, the dialogue is always going to find something wrong with something, as far as you can't cover everything. You are going to be accused of being sort of white, middle class, and highly educated. And the demographic for the QE is obviously that as well. But it's available to everybody. It's just sitting there in the news agents. It's not too expensive. It's also online. So anyone can buy it. But he does say they do take unsolicited correspondence as well. So if you're not well known, you can write in and say, this is great, this is bad, whatever. The vitriol, I think, comes from the sort of cultural wars, the feminist cultural wars in Australia, which were probably replicated all around the world. I'm not sure. But given the opportunity to have a say, have a go, they will. And Macquarie, interestingly, is a much younger person than the other people who responded, the other woman who responded. And she sort of said, look, I thought it was great, fantastic, really good that is there, that one thing has been written, that's good, but she's going to get flack. And she did. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
Time for one more question, Matthew. Thanks. It's a question for Todd and Jacqueline. Just curious, I don't know the answer to this, which is why I'm asking it. Ted Conover wrote You Jack back in 2000. Since then, he's published one book, The Roots of Man, which was comprising a series of essays. Hasn't written another full-length book, although he has done some more undercover work. It raises in my mind a question about the impact of this work, which you both rightly pointed out is very, very difficult and dangerous and so on. The impact of this work on the journalists themselves. I don't know what the answer to the question about Ted Conover, but it just kind of came up in my mind, so I'm curious on your thoughts on that issue. Yeah,
Ted Conover mentions that it took an extraordinary psychic toll on him just living that double life, and the longer he went on with that, the more he couldn't reconcile that with him and he lost friends, and his relationship with his wife was sort of in the gutter at the end of that. And so, yeah, you do it for a long time, and Antonio Salas talks about that as well. He's gone deep undercover. His investigation on the terrorist recruiting networks of several jihadi groups took enormous toll on him, both literally, physically. He found at one point that if he was going to be in bathhouses with some of these jihadis, he needed to get a circumcision. And he didn't. That's a toll. Yeah, that's a toll. There you go. But psychic as well, right? But yeah, Conover talks about that as well. And a bit of the betrayal of the fellow guards as well, who he became quite close with. He said that at one point he got invited to a Memorial Day barbecue or something at a house of one of his colleagues, and he knew it would be great literary stuff, but he also knew he couldn't do it. He couldn't reconcile going there and writing that up, that the material that he knew would be golden. So he said no.
The tyranny of the clock is upon us. If you have additional questions, please feel free always through the entire conference to approach members of the panel and interact with them one-on-one. They'd be delighted to do so. Thank you to our panel, and thank you to all.